I'm Heidi Shedlock and welcome to my studio, welcome to my channel, A Creative Life, where I share all things creative, all the things I get up to, whether it's here in my studio or traveling around with my sketchbooks. If you're new here, welcome. I hope you stick around and do something creative with me. Now, last week, I want to say thank you so much for all of your lovely comments. I shared purchasing in some art supplies and I made a few mistakes with the things that I'd purchased in, but I also shared with you some soft pastels that I purchased in, and I showed you a bit about how I use them, and I gave you a little sneak peek of me working in my sketchbook with my chalk pastels, and some of you saw how my chalk pastels were stored. Now that brought on a whole lot of conversations, which is absolutely wonderful, because how exciting is it that we live in a time where we can share with artists all around the world. So many of you sent me messages and said, how are your pastels stored? What are your pastels sitting in? Because I know it might seem quite strange, but my pastels are actually stored in a bed of rice. Yes, you heard me, good old uncooked rice. And today I thought I would pop on here and share with you how I actually store my soft pastels, because I have found that over the years it has really helped my pastels to not only last a long time but keep them nice and clean and not break up and go all chalky and messy in the container that they're saved in. So lots of you didn't seem to know about the rice trick. Is it a trick? I'm not actually sure how I learned about it or where I found out about it. It's just the way I've always stored my chalk pastels or my soft pastels. And so many of you sent me messages about it that I thought I would pop on here and show you how I share my pastels. Also want to show you what I do with my pastels when they arrive brand new in my studio. And I'll show you a little trick for how to clean your chalk pastels if your chalk pastels are sitting in a big pile in a mess, which so many of you told me yours were. I even had somebody say, I haven't used my chalk pastels in ages because they're just so gunky and messy, and yep, you get the picture. So welcome to a short little video today on my soft pastels and how I store them, and a few little tips and tricks thrown in too. I want to start off by sharing with you what I do with a brand new pastel when I have first bought it. Now, the very first thing I do may horrify you, but I'm going to explain to you why I do it. So the first thing I do is remove any of the outer packaging, and then I take the pastel and I break it in two in the center so that I'm left with two generously sized pieces of pastel. Now, the reason why I do that is because, have you ever been working with a pastel and the very end of it breaks off, snaps off? There's nothing more irritating than having these tiny little pieces that end up sort of being so small that they're hard to use. I have lots of little pieces like that, and while I do still use them, it becomes rather irritating because they get small quite quickly. And the other reason why I try to break it, okay, I haven't broken this one very well, have I? Try to break them in equal pieces. If you, like I've done here, are a bit worried about not getting it quite equal, you could actually use a craft knife and, put a little edging in it and snap it that way. That would probably have been the better way to show you how to do it. But what I do is, if I now have two sizes, this is still a nice generous size or piece of pastel to use, I then have a piece that I can keep in the studio, in my container in my studio. I'll show it to you now. And then I have another piece that I can put in my traveling set. Now, I have just a little box here, a little plastic box, and I have separated it with a little piece of board. I just cut it from some packaging, and I keep my warm colors on one side and my cool colors on the other side. And you can see that this little piece here is now a perfect piece to take away with me if I am traveling or I'm going away and I want to take some chalk pastels. I don't have to take my whole container of pastels from my studio. I have a tiny little box here. It's got a lovely lid that seals it up, and I can take these along with me. So I have a little set of chalk pastels that can come away with me if I'm going away on a holiday, or I'm going to be painting or drawing or taking my sketchbook outside of the studio, a nice compact little container that has a great selection of all of my chalk pastels. So rather than allowing the pastel to snap off and ending up with a whole lot of tiny little pieces, I always snap my pastels as equally as possible. I try and do it in the middle, and I snap them so that I can have a nice generous piece for the studio and a nice generous piece for my little traveling box, a perfect size to take out with me, and a beautiful selection of colors. Look at that. Oh, now you'll notice that peeping underneath here is something that, this is what you were all asking me about after the last video. Yes, believe it or not, there is rice in my box. Let me explain to you why, and let me show you the container that I use for my studio pastels. So this is the container that I use for my pastels in my studio. They're a nice big container. It's a nice big container. It can store lots of different colors, but it is actually just an old biscuit tin that I have saved and reused. I think it's really lovely to be able to reuse items in our studio that would otherwise be thrown away. You could, of course, go out and buy one of those beautiful little wooden boxes with the drawers that you pull out, and they have the lovely little separate compartments for all the different colors. Yes, in an ideal world, that would be lovely. But if I have any spare money to spend in my art studio, I want to spend it on supplies that I can use. I really love to try and use, for storage purposes, use things that I can find around my studio. So also, perhaps it's because I'm not necessarily a pastel artist, so it's not my main medium. So if it was, perhaps I would be more willing to spend quite a bit of money and buy one of those drawers. But for me, a good sturdy container, this is just a tin, you could use any container, works perfectly. The downside though is that because it doesn't have all those little compartments and the lovely little drawers, all of your colors tend to get mixed up together. And that's where the rice comes into play. Now, I don't know where I ever learned this from or who shared it with me, and perhaps you think it is a load of rubbish, but this is what works for me, and maybe it will help some of you storing your pastels in a better way as well. You see, the thing with chalk pastels is that they are so soft and they break so easily that if they are in a container and they're banging up against one another all the time, you can just end up with a pile of dust in your container. The other thing is that, bumping up against one another, they can get quite dirty when they are bumping up against all the other colors. So what the rice does, and yes, it is just good old uncooked rice that I put in here. Please don't cook it. You'll end up with a pulpy mess in your container. But this is just good old uncooked rice. I think I have brown rice here purely because that's what I have at home. That's what we've been eating. But you could use just a good old uncooked white rice, whatever rice you have at home. Not an expensive rice, please, because obviously you can't eat this once you've used it. But whatever rice you have at home, uncooked, dry rice, lay it in a bit of a bed in the bottom of your container. You can see the rice in the bottom of my container, right? What the rice will do is it will provide a lovely soft bed for your pastels to sit on, for starters, so that they're not rattling around in the bottom of your container and making, getting all dusty or breaking up. It also keeps them nice and clean. So, being up against the rice sort of doesn't, they still touch, obviously, because I've got so many crammed into my container, but it does help to clean them. And a way that you can clean them is to take, so if you have some pastels that are a bit dirty, let me see if I can find some. I've got a white here that is a little bit dirty. If you have some pastels that are dirty, stick them into a bag with some rice, a Ziploc bag. I'm going to zip up the bag. And then what you want to do is you want to give the container a bit of a jiggle. Now, I'm not sure that this is going to make a very nice sound on the camera, actually. So Maybe I'll just stop it for a little bit while I'm doing this, but put your pastels into the rice and jiggle them around so that the rice is buffing up a little bit against the pastel. And what that's going to do is it's going to just take a bit of a dusty layer off of the edge of your pastel and clean it. Let me give this a good shake and a jiggle so that I can clean this one. And I'm going to switch the camera microphone off for a little bit. So there we have it. I've been jiggling this white inside this bag of rice, and let's take it out now and have a look. Look there how much cleaner it is. The rice has just bumped up against the edge of it, taking just that little bit of dirty dust that it's picked up from, you know, not only when you are storing it with other colors, but also sometimes your hands get really dirty when you are working with it, or sometimes you're maybe layering the white over another color and your pastels can get a little bit dirty. So that is a great way to keep your pastels clean. And for me, I find storing them on the bed of rice not only keeps them clean, but stops them from breaking. It protects them and just keeps them a little bit safer in this container. So I hope that if you haven't known how to store your pastels, this will maybe be something that you could give a try to. Also, try breaking them in half so that you have 2 sets. I find that generally it is a much more economical way to use my chalk pastels. Last of all, don't forget to fix your pastels. If you've been working in your sketchbook with some chalk pastels, don't forget that they need to be fixed so that they don't smudge in your book or on your artwork or on your paper. Now, I know what you're thinking. Fixative can be quite an expensive addition to your studio materials, right? Or at least here in South Africa, a lot of the fixatives come at quite a hefty price. So I want to show you or tell you a little bit of a trick. Now, obviously, if you are selling your work, if you've created artwork that has chalk pastels in it and you are selling it, you need to use the best quality fixative that you can possibly afford to ensure that that artwork is correctly sealed. But if you're just working in your sketchbooks, I know the feeling to spray some really expensive fixative just into your sketchbooks, which are really just your personal place to play and enjoy. Well, I don't actually use fixative in my sketchbooks. I actually use hairspray. Yep, hairspray, good old-fashioned hairspray. And to be honest with you, this is what I would use in the classroom environment where normally funds are, you know, you can't break the bank on the art supplies in a classroom environment. Normally you have a really small budget, and if I have a small budget, I want to be able to buy beautiful quality art materials for the children to use, not wasted on something like a fixative. So in a classroom environment, I would always use hairspray to fix the children's work onto paper. And let me tell you, it works absolutely beautifully. It doesn't yellow, it doesn't stain, it works perfectly on paper or sketchbooks that are not obviously being used to be sold, or, you know, if you're selling artwork, you need to use the proper stuff. But just for sketchbooks or if you're working with children, use hairspray. The only trick is make sure your hairspray is unscented. So unscented hairspray, and that is because often when a perfume or scent is added to a hairspray, it is sometimes an oil-based perfume or an oil-based scent that is added to it. So you don't want any oily spots on the artwork as you spray it out. Although, to be honest with you, I've actually used normal hairspray and it's worked absolutely fine. But my recommendation is to find unscented hairspray and use that in your sketchbooks. Don't waste the expensive stuff. Save that for the artwork that you are selling. So thank you for joining me today. I hope that if you have some soft pastels sitting in a dirty little pile that feels quite unappealing to use, that I've shown you a way that you can clean them up and store them now in a way that they don't break, don't get all dirty and mix with all the colors. If you are looking for a way to seal your artwork in your book and you've been put off by the fact that fixative is so expensive, well, now you know the trick. Good old hairspray in your sketchbooks, unscented. So thanks for joining me. If you have any more tips about soft pastels that you can share with anyone in this community, send me a comment below, let me know, send me a message. I'd love to hear it. I love the fact that we all learn from one another and that we all get to share together, share our ideas, share how things work in our studio. I love the fact that somebody on the other side of the world can send me a message here in South Africa and tell me what works for them in their studio. Isn't that amazing? We live in such exciting times. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe if you'd like to stick around and create more with me. Otherwise, thanks for joining me today.